Hello and welcome to the Investors Org interview series. Today I'm thrilled to have one of our stars that came through the Investors Org system, process, connections, and we're thrilled to interview Adam Stone.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome. Adam, we've got a lot of questions for you because you've come in as our startup
Have I?
founder. Yes, you have.
Okay.
So, firstly, just tell us a bit about yourself and your background before we get into the startup and having a company.
So I've always been an entrepreneur. Started my first business when I was 12. Take after my dad. My last business I started when I was 14, and that was an e-commerce platform actually, or in the mobile phone space.
Amazing.
That one got really lucky. It scaled to 100,000 customers around the world.
Wow.
But I leveraged a lot of freelancers, so that brings me to Speedlancer, which I'm the founder of. And Speedlancer is a freelancing platform with a bit of technology behind it. So we use a mixture of curation elements and technology in order to bring freelancers closer than ever before to teams in real situations.
Amazing, and we'll hear more of that
Sure.
at the end specifically. Did you always want to become a founder? I think you're a bit ahead of your time in that you were doing this before startups was a thing or trendy. Was it something you always wanted to be a founder, or you just like playing with new ideas?
I don't know if I was before startups, but
Well, in Australia.
Okay. I never really considered myself an entrepreneur until a few years ago at all. I always just did my own thing, went out there, tried to make a couple of bucks, never wanted a job.
Yep.
So I guess that makes me an entrepreneur, as opposed to the other way around, which is going from wanting to be an entrepreneur to becoming one. I don't know much about that experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And founder as in that your ideas, you felt that you wanted to do what you felt was right.
Yeah, I suppose it's the creative element as well. You know, having ideas brought to life and seeing it to fruition and seeing it expand, seeing real people use it, having real testimonials come back, always makes you feel good.
No, excellent. And part of this series, we wanted to speak to some startup founders, and we wanted to ask about the investment journey. So we get the opposite angle of the investor saying what they look for.
Mm-hmm.
So share with us, at what stage did you think you needed to get investment?
Mm-hmm.
Was it always something you thought was necessary? And then we'll talk about how you went about it and so
Speedlancer was always a side project. I was studying full-time in uni, commerce law. I had my previous business still running. I started this thing that leveraged my existing freelancer base. It wasn't doing that well, maybe $200 a month in revenue. And around the same time, well, actually, because Investors all brought Dave McClure out from 500 Startups, and I had the opportunity to intern and meet with him, one thing led to another, and I ended up in San Francisco 2 weeks later with a now funded startup. So I'm not sure if I was actually looking to have Speedlancer be the next thing, be funded. I'm not really sure. But 2 weeks after you brought Dave out, it became a real company. And I've never looked back from there.
Amazing. But I guess some of that internal spirit of, hey, I'll go with this. I'll go and do what it takes. I'll go to San Fran.
Yeah.
I'll speak to these people. I'll get my foundation right. Is that something you focused on once you realised you had an opportunity to go that way?
Yeah, but the first day I met Dave and he asked me to go to San Francisco, which apparently he doesn't normally do, I actually turned it down. I said no. I was studying full-time. I said, can I come next year? This is just a side project. I've got this actual real business which is doing way better. He said no. So I said, oh, okay, let me think about it. So the next day I came back to him, he said, okay, I can let you in for an interview. So we kind of backtracked a little bit, and I ended up getting through the interview and going to San Francisco. So I'm not even sure if in my vision was to race at that point.
Right.
Eventually, I started Speedlancer for one purpose, and that was to get involved in the startup scene and network and learn. Sure. My previous business was more of a business, not a startup. So I guess Investors Org was a good catalyst for that, actually. A very good catalyst in terms of the networking that I wanted to accomplish. But also, just having something to pitch at startup events was really valuable and something I achieved.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I set out and achieved that purpose. Yeah.
That's excellent. So probably the point of value to startups watching this is the decision, and yours seem to have been forced upon you, but any guidance of when do I take this full-time seriously? Because that's all, you have to do that, I assume, to give it a proper go.
Yes, which I was not ready for. My previous business, as I mentioned, I leveraged freelancers. I leveraged them so well to the point where I got it down to a 10-minute work week. It's still technically running, and I say 10 minutes because it sounds good. It's actually 0. I don't do nothing. It's the closest you can get to passive as you can get. So I was very fortunate, but it took me a while to realise that I actually needed to work hard to get a business to that point, because it had been 4 or 5 years since I'd actually done that. I was used to working hard because of studying and negotiating an enterprise contract or whatever at the same time, but it took me a while to realise the amount of grunt work that is involved in getting a startup from 0 to the first stage.
And you put your studies on hold at that stage?
I did, yeah. And then I came back to Australia, finished it off.
Okay.
Because my visa got rejected.
Which happens. And could have been a chance to say, okay, I'll get back into my old life, part-time, but no, you're committed?
It worked out well because we ended up raising money from Australian VCs and angels.
And to do that, was it what you expected, that the questions and the people and the investors to deal with? And what was important about the investors from your perspective?
So the biggest learnings I had was probably in the US, actually. They know what kinds of businesses they want to fund, and we weren't one of them. I soon figured it out. I came back to Australia, took those learnings, and didn't even bother pitching to VCs, at least. To angels, I did pitch because we needed some extra capital. But I made sure that we reached some revenue targets and had a better story to tell. And I was more enthusiastic and had my story down pat a little bit better and the pitch a bit better. So I had learnt a lot from 500 Startups. It was like going through an MBA for startups.
Amazing.
And I came back here knowing what I needed to focus on. And then once we were ready to raise, I knew we were ready. And the Australian investor climate had also really changed in 1 year.
Yeah.
So we ended up raising in September last year.
That's amazing.
Through a connection we found through Investors All.
Thank you very much. And you mentioned focus. And it's hard for a founder of a startup to focus on what's important at the right time. How did you know that time was important to focus on investment and not on scaling up your business, or did you have to just try everything?
Yeah. Scaling a business is always more important, but eventually you need to raise because you need to raise, and that's the point of capital, I think.
Yeah.
So if you need to raise money, you need to raise money, which probably means it's a worse business, but it can also mean you have a bigger goal. So for ours, it was a bit of both. We were raising at a time where we needed to raise, never a good sign for investors, and B, because I had a really big goal. So that's how we were able to attract the investors that we did.
Excellent. And what do you find important about the investors? Is your relationship important, or that they just review your monthly report and sign off, or do you want more from investors?
Yeah, I feel like you don't want an investor who does not align with you at all, but I think that's very unlikely to happen because you're not going to pass the beer test with them. You're not going to get through those first few meetings. You'll just have disagreements. You won't pass diligence because they'll see that your style is different to theirs. So I'm not sure if that's too much of an issue. And then as long as they're not totally misaligned with you, I think value add versus not. Obviously, value add is way better. So our investors are all value add. They are.
Are or will be.
Are or will be. Yeah, exactly. No, they are. But I think at the end of the day, you're raising not... I think most investors who say they're value add aren't actually adding that much value. So I think be wary of that, which is not necessarily a bad thing because you're looking for one thing and that's capital to help you grow.
Right.
If you're looking for advisors, that's a separate topic. That's also what you need to focus, Focus
That's
what
really
you use
important.
your connections for.
That's really interesting, yeah. That's right. You do need capital.
Yeah, you need capital. So I think picking
right.
investors, good luck. Good luck, unless your business is really that shabby, in which case do you really need their value anyway? I don't know. Maybe you do. Our investors are useful in terms of helping prepare for future raises from a finance point of view, from an investor perspective especially. From a growth perspective, the angels tend to be most valuable because they've done it before. So that was one of the things I looked for, but also not necessarily the reason I looked for them, it's the reason they saw an interest in me because they can see that we somewhat, align.
Excellent. So you mentioned just then briefly, and I'll go on that for your first raise, and I don't want private details
Yeah.
or so suggestions for startups, it is timely and takes a lot of effort to raise. So should you raise a significant amount, or should you start smaller, gradual, step by step, even though the effort is still,
Yeah.
in my view, quite significant regardless how much you raise?
A step-by-step approach is quite dangerous because you might get to a point where you need to raise the next round despite you not having reached the goals that you had promised your previous investors.
Uh-huh.
So that can actually slow you down rather than speed you up. What it does usually accomplish in theory is that you're raising at a better valuation each time, so you can step the valuation. If you get a pretty good valuation up front, raise more than you need. If you're getting a pretty crappy valuation, probably actually doesn't matter because at an early stage it will still dilute. So the fact that it was at a lower valuation probably just makes the next round easier to raise. It probably doesn't actually affect the amount of equity that you hold that much by the time you're at Series B, C, or D. Like a $100,000 check out of a $7 million to date raise when you're in Series B or Series A, that $100,000 just dilutes down.
Right.
So it doesn't matter what valuation you raise that for $100,000, for example.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, there's all approaches. And what do you think the trends are for startups looking to raise investment? I think it is becoming more competitive, and you do need to align with not just to take any dangling money that's out there, which may have been done in the past.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't see any dangling money, personally. Some people do, but, it took us a number of years. Yeah, I'm not sure what... I guess the biggest question for investors are always going to be, what's your revenue at and how much room do you have to grow? I think the story will always be more important, otherwise they're just looking at you from a private equity perspective. Which means your valuation is, way too high for what it's worth. But if you've got a good story to tell, and a really compelling one, and a really big vision, and a way that you're going to get there, and previous track record preferably, or any sorts of traction that you can show, that all helps you raise at that valuation, which is kind of what it's about.
And one point on that, and then we'll find out what you're up to now moving forward, is what about the technology if you are a tech-oriented startup?
Mm-hmm.
Do investors look at that as not where their money wants to go, or is it just a necessary part of what has to be invested into?
Yeah, I think startups are generally technology startups because it's so scalable and it can, be distributed so widely. That's not to say that you can't have a non-technology startup also going gangbusters, but I think technology also adds IP, as I mentioned, distribution and scalability.
Yeah.
On the other end of the spectrum, if you're doing something really high-tech, that requires a different type of investor who has the capacity to understand the whole market, which most investors, some investors don't understand.
Right.
Some investors will not invest in high-tech because they don't understand it and they don't know where it fits in the market and if it's about to go out of date as soon as they invest.
Right.
So I think there's kind of a mix between technology, high-tech, and then just having a business. And you can make a business scalable. If you can prove that, you can raise venture capital money. Technology, easy in theory to raise as long as you're doing something new and innovative.
Yep.
And something with an actual market need, and then through to high-tech, which can be quite difficult to raise, I would think.
Excellent insight. So moving forward, speedlancer.com. What's happening? Where are you going to? What are your plans coming up now? It's you've done a fantastic job, and I know many people that use your platform. Just saves hours, gets a good result, gets them to what they want to achieve that day, that week.
Yeah.
So what's next?
So we've improved our platform quite a bit since we last raised, or even before that. We started off with single freelancers doing individual tasks. Then we realized they actually wanted to spend more, but they weren't using freelancers traditionally or through us because of the way that freelancers had traditionally worked. So freelancers traditionally have to go through a whole recruiting process, just a waste of time. You have to guess and check. You have to arbitrarily choose freelancers and then have to replace the work because it wasn't done properly. It also has to fit in with your team and your processes. So what we do is with our bundles process, we've actually created a platform which is a workflow system where multiple freelancers can actually work together in one campaign. So you might have a designer, a writer, a researcher, even a developer or an animator coming soon, all working together in the one campaign and delivering you that whole outcome.
Nice.
Without you having to recruit or choose or do anything. So it sits between kind of an agency model, but with no management overheads,
Yep.
and actually having someone in-house, which is to say that you can still control the full process from start to finish.
Amazing.
So you can have as much input as you'd like. And then beyond the bundles, we've progressed now to a recurring approach. So we offer a concierge plan, which is a project management approach, and that's where we can assign you a single project manager, and we get the same workflows done every week or every month and do custom campaigns. So in terms of what we're looking to in the future, it's growing that concierge recurring revenue stream and also growing to enterprise. So we've got some trials going at the moment, paid trials, with some larger enterprises, and hopefully we can expand it that way.
Amazing. Sounds great.
Yes,
Yeah, you're gonna take over the world.
Hopefully.
You've heard it first here at Investors. Well,
Cheers.
thank you for sharing that insight. Really valuable, exciting days, and we wish you well ahead.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks for having me. Cool.